The meeting started at exactly 9 a.m. It was one of those meetings where everyone already had an opinion before the conversation even began. Laptops opened, slides prepared, voices ready. Daniel sat near the middle of the table, quietly adjusting his notebook. This was his third week at the company. Still new, still observing. Across the room sat Victor, the senior project lead. Someone everyone seemed to respect without fully understanding why. Victor wasn't loud, he wasn't overly expressive. And unlike most senior managers Daniel had seen before, he didn't dominate conversations. In fact, when the meeting began, Victor said nothing at all. The presentation started. A team member stood up and began explaining a new strategy proposal. Charts appeared on the screen, numbers were discussed, timelines were projected. Within minutes, the discussion became fast. People interrupted each other. Some defended their ideas before anyone questioned them. Others repeated points slightly differently just to ensure they were heard. Daniel noticed something interesting. The more people spoke, the less clear the conversation became. Ideas overlapped, arguments expanded, confidence started sounding like noise, and through all of it, Victor remained silent. No interruptions, no reactions, just listening. At one point, someone even glanced toward him, almost expecting him to step in. He didn't. After about 20 minutes, the room began slowing down. Not because the problem had been solved, but because people were running out of new things to say. This is something that happens in many discussions. When people speak early and often, they gradually exhaust their strongest arguments first. What remains is repetition. Daniel could feel the energy shifting. The conversation was losing direction. Then something subtle happened. One of the managers leaned back in his chair and said, "Victor, what do you think?" The room went quiet. Not forced quiet, natural quiet, the kind of silence that carries attention. Victor didn't answer immediately. He glanced at the screen, then at his notebook, then briefly around the room. 5 seconds passed. To Daniel, it felt much longer. Then Victor spoke. "I think we're trying to solve 3 problems at once." The room stayed silent. Victor continued, "But only one of them is actually causing the delays." He stood up calmly and walked toward the screen. Within less than a minute, he pointed to 2 numbers. "These are symptoms. This is the cause." That was it. No long speech, no dramatic tone, just clarity. And suddenly, everything made sense. The discussion that had taken 20 minutes to complicate was simplified in less than 60 seconds. The meeting ended shortly after. Decisions became obvious. Actions became clear. People gathered their laptops and began leaving the room. Daniel stayed seated for a moment, replaying what had just happened. Victor hadn't spoken the most. He hadn't argued the most. But somehow his words had carried the most weight. Daniel couldn't ignore it, so he walked over. "Can I ask you something?" Victor smiled slightly. "Of course." Daniel hesitated for a moment. "How did you know exactly what to say?" Victor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked a question. "How much of the meeting were you trying to speak? And how much were you trying to understand?" Daniel paused. He realized he hadn't been trying to understand at all. He had been preparing what he might say if someone asked for his opinion. Victor nodded, as if the silence had already answered the question. Then he said something Daniel would remember for years. "Most people listen to reply. Very few listen to see the pattern." Over the next few weeks, Daniel started noticing the pattern everywhere. In meetings, in conversations, even in casual discussions during lunch. The people who spoke the most weren't always the most influential. In fact, they often weren't. The people who spoke with the most impact were usually the ones who spoke last. Not because they were holding back, but because they were collecting information. They were watching how ideas moved, where uncertainty appeared, which arguments repeated, because repetition reveals weakness and confusion reveals opportunity. A month later, Daniel found himself in another meeting. This time, the discussion became complicated again. Different viewpoints, different solutions, different levels of confidence. And without thinking about it, Daniel almost did what he always used to do. He almost spoke immediately. But then he remembered Victor's words. Listen to see the pattern. So he stayed quiet. Not passively quiet, observationally quiet. He started noticing things. Two people were solving the same problem from different angles. Another suggestion sounded confident but lacked data. One idea kept resurfacing every few minutes. That idea, Daniel realized, was probably important. The conversation continued. Eventually, someone turned toward him. Daniel, what do you think? The same moment. The same silence. The same pressure. But this time something was different. Daniel wasn't searching for words. He already knew them. I think two of these ideas are connected, he said calmly. And if we solve one, the other disappears. The room went quiet. People looked at each other, then back at him. The conversation shifted direction. Not dramatically, but clearly. And for the first time, Daniel understood what had happened weeks earlier. It wasn't about speaking well, it was about speaking at the right time. After the meeting ended, Victor walked past him. No long conversation. No dramatic acknowledgement. Just a small nod, and Daniel realized something important. Influence doesn't come from dominating conversations, it comes from understanding them. Most people believe communication is about expression, but in reality, powerful communication starts with observation, because when you observe first, you don't just hear words, you see structure, you see patterns, and patterns create clarity,